okay, things have to be said because systems, priorities, understanding, there's no way, we just have to do it.
What the hell are you talking about?
Stuff.
We got to do this promo shit, man.
I know.
Well, let's do it.
That's right. Let's do it. I can read it. I've never even read it.
You think you can do this?
No.
You want to do it?
That's why I would say, because I can't.
No?
No, I don't think I would do a good job. Nowhere near as good as you. That's the honest truth. I mean, I'll do it if you want it to be stupid.
If you want it to be stupid.
Yeah, if you want.
Well, Tangent says we have to do this. If we don't do this, he's not going to let us out of the basement.
Yeah, I'll do it.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Hey guys, Matt and Eric here from the No Shit Cast. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about our hosting member site, thexfactory.com. Thexfactory.com is a collaborative website where people and artists can come together and sort of commune and share their work and collaborate and create things that can be mass marketed and stuff like that. The X Factory is run by our friend Tangent. Tangent runs this from this old industrial building in Philadelphia. We're not really sure where, because every now and then he kidnaps us and locks us in the basement until we pop out another podcast. So it'd be really nice if you'd help us get some donations for Tangent over there, because A, we're sick of getting kidnapped, and it's a really great organization. It does a lot of really cool shit and helps artists and stuff like that out. Second thing we want to talk to you about is our guest last week was Dan Cross. Dan's actually working with the X Factory. He's got I guess it's like a donation drive or gift donation drive. So if you go over there to the X Factory, look up Dan Cross. I think he's got a CD from his band Alpha Rhythm. And if you donate $20 to the X Factory, you get the CD. So not only do you support the X Factory, you get swag and cool shit in the process. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is some of the stuff that the collaborative stuff that the X Factory does is something that's it's called Produgi. I think it's Produgi, and basically what it is it looks like Tangent will get a couple artists together, like say like a musician and then a graphic artist, puts them together. They put together some material, and then he puts that on like a CDR, and that gets sold as a unit in which all three members of that deal it's a way for them to make money on it and collaborate together and share their art and everybody to benefit financially from it. So anyway, we're a little partial. Tangent's our buddy, and he helps us out a lot, but we just wanted to throw him some love, and again, really, really interesting stuff going on over there at the X Factory. So when you guys get a chance, check it out. Eric.
Yes.
You got nothing to add? I thought you were going to do this.
I'd have to read it. I like all of that though.
That was good.
Like it was no. I mean, I like everything you said.
Do you think we should just keep what I just did and just get on with the show with Susan? We can just put this at the beginning, and now we just move on and get to Susan, right?
That would be optimum.
Why don't we just do that?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do that.
Fantastic.
All right. Hello out there, and welcome to the No Shit Cast, flagship podcast of the X Factory Creative Network. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. Tonight's guest is a practicing Pharmakeute, an initiate in the ash, birch, and willow tradition. She hand makes each and every one of her products within a sacred space and with ritual energy, giving loving attention to detail with 100% certified organic free trade and or wildcrafted herbs from her own gardens and or other completely reputable sources. Most of her products are created out of personal need for something particular, and everything else is inspired by requests from her friends and family. Her name's Susan Cote, and she's on our show tonight. My co-host, as usual, the gray wizard of historical knowledge himself, Mr. Eric Smith. How you doing tonight, Eric?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking that.
Nothing snarky to say tonight,
no,
huh?
No.
Nothing planned.
My brain is engaged.
So, who we got coming up on the show in the coming weeks here, Mr. Smith? Oh, he's got to get his calendar. He wasn't ready.
Yeah. I thought this was another part.
It cracks when he opens it, man.
Well, on the 24th of March, which is actually going to be the 25th, right?
Okay.
When we actually post it.
Okay.
The 25th, we'll have the Dr. Young talking about music theory and the history of rock and roll. And on the guess that would be the 1st of April. We'll have Dr. Nevin coming and talking with us about American history. And on the 8th of April, we'll have Lauren Curtis come and talking with us.
Very cool, man. All right, so some really good shit coming up here on the show, folks. Make sure you check back in for that. But tonight's guest is Susan Cote. How you doing this evening, Susan?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. So really glad. I know it was really short notice. We sort of put you on the spot to jump on the show tonight, but I've been looking forward to talking to you and having you come on and kind of explain, what you do and things like that. Did I pronounce that word in the beginning right? I think it was Pharmakeute?
Pharmakeute, you absolutely did.
Hey, I got something right, huh? Can you take some kind of time, a little bit of time here and sort of elaborate on what that means?
Well, the word comes from what the oldest known word for witch, which is pharmakis. It's a Greek word. And as you can imagine, we have pharmacy, pharmaceuticals. So it was basically a person who has a well-established relationship and knowledge of plants and their properties. We've kind of adopted that word, pharmakeute, instead of witch, for obvious reasons. The word witch doesn't have, really nice connotations with it.
So the implication being more than an herbalist in the sense that not only do you have intimate knowledge of the healing properties of herbs and such, but also the magical properties as well, right?
Exactly. And it's not only the healing properties, because in order to heal, you also have to know the bad properties. So you're aware of and have knowledge of working with what is known as the baneful plants, because in order to heal, you have to know also how to harm.
Susan, this is kind of what we do on here. Take us back to where this kind of all began for you, and how this journey that you're currently on sort of started and what led you to that.
And specifically, I was wondering, like, when were you introduced to paganism in general, and then later, if it happened in this way later, if not in the same time, when did you become aware of the particular branch of paganism that you are currently operating within?
Okay. Well, I was living overseas for almost 20 years as a Muslim. So it wasn't then.
Wow, that's an interesting journey. Holy cow, I didn't think it started there. Wow.
But there were always leanings towards metaphysical just ideas. And, I was always questioning things. And so I was always reading different books that would have probably gotten me stoned over there.
Gotcha.
But I really got into it after I met Jeff. So after I got back to the States in 2008. And he has a rather prodigious library of pagan books and different authors. And it started with me reading Scott Cunningham's books. And nothing against Scott Cunningham's books. They're well written, and there are a lot of people that have gained a lot of knowledge from him. But I found him lacking, and I was looking for something deeper. And that's when I found, it was around the same year, 2008, maybe 2009, that I was introduced to Raven Grimassi's works. And that's where the Rose and Thorn path, or the Ash, Birch and Willow path, it's also called, that's where that comes in. Almost immediately when I started reading his books. And then I discovered he was living in New England. And I said, this is somebody I need to study with and learn from, because he knows stuff. And that to me was that was so profound and amazing.
You said that you had been involved in the Islamic religion for, you say 10 or 20 years?
Well, I was living in the Middle East for 20 years. I didn't actually adopt the religion immediately. I think it might have been 5 years in that I finally converted to Islam.
And was that part of a search for spirituality for you, or was that a matter of circumstances? Was that like, and I guess another way of phrasing that question is, was that the first religion that you were exposed to, or were you on a quest at that point to find something more meaningful for you?
Well, to be honest, I'd been on a quest all my life. I can remember I was raised as a Southern Baptist, very strict Southern Baptist. And I went to, Jimmy Swaggart had a revival down in Greenville, South Carolina at the Greenville Memorial Auditorium. And I don't even remember how young I was, possibly 7 or 8. And my mom took me up to the stage to be saved. And I can remember Jimmy Swaggart laying his hands on me and telling me that I was saved, but I didn't feel any changes. I felt like if I was suddenly saved, if God had touched me, that I should feel something.
Yeah, some kind of definite difference.
Yeah, it was something so you definitely didn't connect with it, is what you're saying, right? You didn't.
Right, no.
And how old were you again?
I don't know, maybe 7 or 8. I was very young.
Okay.
But I remember thinking something was wrong, either with me or with the church, with the religion itself. Something was just off.
So you may have had very deep spiritual questions prior to this happening that you felt would at least be alleviated, but were in fact not in at all, which probably deepened the mystery for you.
Absolutely. And so having gone through the years of being raised as a Southern Baptist and just not, just going through the motions basically, and going to church on Sunday and Sunday school, but not really having any real connection to what was going on and what was being said. When I moved to Kuwait and started learning about Islam, I said, okay, well, this is something different. This is, while the roots are the same, because when I started comparing the two, I learned that fundamentally there aren't a lot of differences.
Right, yeah.
But some of the foundations, I think, more that come from what they call the sunnah of the prophet, the sayings and stories that the prophet Muhammad would tell, those kind of resonated more with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that for me was really interesting, and so I delved into that kind of wholeheartedly, which led to which led to a lot of strife, as you can imagine, with my mother, who was still a very strict Southern Baptist.
Sure. I imagine it was hard for you to even breach the subject with her.
It was. And I mean, it led to a lot of arguments, and eventually we just agreed to disagree and not talk about it because she was sure that I was going to hell. And
so there was a resistance to really even talking about it, I imagine, between you and your family.
Well, it was really just my mom that I talked to when I was living overseas. I have a kind of strange family, so we're all sort of estranged from each other. And it was my mother, really. My grandparents who raised me, and Grandma, while they were raised as Catholics, they weren't strongly religious. And actually, whenever I would bring up religion to my grandmother, she would tell me to stop. She didn't even want to talk about it. She didn't want to discuss it. I remember we had made prayer rugs in art class one time, and she didn't even want it in the house. So,
and there, that is a religion that you can take pretty deep when you're starting to ask philosophical and spiritual questions. And of course, there's a huge connection between the Islamic religion and the Christian religion and the Judaic religion. And
absolutely,
the Judaic religion goes back into antiquity and things of that nature. So there's a lot of exploration that could be done there. But at some point, I guess it wasn't answering some of the questions that you had, right?
Right. We made the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. So this is a big deal for any Muslim.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I actually got to walk around the building that's in the center, and there's a black stone that they say came from space.
Yes. Yeah.
It's hard to touch it during the Hajj because there are so many people. I mean, millions and millions of people just walking around this building. But there's also a place where they say that as Abraham was building the Kaaba, his foot left an impression in the stone. And it's there, and it's huge. I mean, it's like a giant.
Yeah.
And of course that gets the cogs turning in your head, to imagine these men who were giants back then.
Sure, yeah, and lots of ancient texts support that idea with the phrase in one sense or another. And in those days, there were giants in the earth.
Right.
And I think also in in Judaic and Christian religion, there's the Nephirim, which ties into that legend.
Yeah.
That mythology.
But to me, that just was it was more mystery, and it seemed to lead to even deeper questions that I wasn't finding answers to in either the Quran or the writings of the Prophet. It was, and again, there was no connection internally. I mean, here I was at the most sacred place for Muslims. And I mean, other than the awe of the beauty, because it is a beautiful place, I didn't feel like there was a connection.
You were probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just guessing here, but you were probably, because I've felt this way myself, seeing holes within the pattern, like the pattern of the religion and what it meant and how it related the metaphysical world to the real world. There were definitely like holes in that bridge, that metaphysical bridge.
Exactly. You can't see me, but I'm nodding emphatically. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And largely that's because those religions were predicated upon other more ancient religions that they only in part used. Like if you was to read these other ancient texts, you would be able to understand the whole concept and make much more use of it.
Right.
So yeah, I can totally identify with that feeling of like, wow, yeah, where's all this other stuff at? Like, aren't you guys missing some stuff? Yeah. So
right.
So the underlying tenet there then for you is that it still left feeling as if something was incomplete, which continued you on your search, correct?
Exactly. So when I got back to the States, and was presented with this huge library of books to read, it just kind of, it opened up all these different options. And it started also to fill in holes and answer questions that I had, that suddenly things started to click and make sense.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that particular body of knowledge is the body of knowledge that sustains the connection between the flora and fauna in the metaphysical world too.
You're absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really important. That's not just germane to what you do as a vocation, but it's also great for identifying those physical objects that help with that bridging of to that place.
Well, let's talk about this too, Susan. What was it then? So you come back from the Middle East, you are exposed to this volume, all these volumes of information. Obviously, you find something in that starts to resonate with you, okay? What was that first thing where you went, okay, this is this first task or this first metaphysical thing that I'm going to attempt? What was that path that sort of led you that way?
You know what? It seems like one of the most mundane things that I could say, but it was really just the connection and edification of connecting with the earth, just nature in general, and how our ancestors at one time would look up at the sky and the full moon would be there, and then suddenly it was going away and vanishing. And they didn't have the science to know what was going on, that it's the earth turning or whatever. They didn't know that. And so what wonder did they have at that, and how that affected, because they would plant by the phases of the moon, they would, the agrarian cultures, they used that for their harvests.
Yeah.
And just reading about that and that connection and how man back then worked with the energies of the moon and the seasons was it seems like such a simple thing, but it was huge to me.
Yeah, and it's something that almost goes back to the Neolithic Revolution. there are huge megalithic structures that they arranged that coincide with the movement of the stars, the 5 planets that you can see, and the equinoxes. And there's many ancient cultures who based their whole agrarian society on lunar cycles, and many rituals as well on lunar cycles. And
Right.
so yeah, I mean, it definitely tied in to the pulse of the seasons, the world, and the plants. And then of course that in and of itself ties into fertility and how society perceives itself in terms of fertility and its myths and its agrarian cycle.
Exactly.
Let me read this quote here, because I think this is by you. And you, our ancient ancestors, those wise women and men who lived back in the days long before the advent of Christianity, had special knowledge of plants and their powers. They lived in harmony with and had strong, close ties to the earth and her gifts. I believe that plants have spirits, and that if we take our time and commune with them, the spirit of the plant will speak to us. They will tell us how best to make use of their healing powers if we only pause long enough to listen. It is my sincere desire to forge with the earth in the same type of relationship that our ancestors once had. My learning process will never end, and I hope that even if you do not decide to join me in learning more about the earth and her gifts to us, you will at least accompany me on the journey towards health, peace, happiness, and bliss. That's you, right? That's a statement from you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's so there was something about then it wasn't any one thing, I think is what I'm hearing you say. You're saying that the overall sort of connection to seasons and cycles and things like that was what resonated with you. So there was any one particular facet of it that attracted you more than another?
No, there wasn't any. There's not one particular thing that I could say that was the reason. It was just an overall general, like a connection to something ancient, to something primal, to something that felt real finally.
Yeah.
You know, after a lifetime of searching.
And it is too. The earliest recorded burials that we have in our archaeological records are of Neanderthals who put specific plants into the burial site with the person that they buried. So,
Right.
This is like 40,000 to 60,000 years ago, which predates most written records, if not all, unless you're considering cave paintings to be those written records. But, it's been shown scientifically that plants have emotions and react to the environment around them, and even have symbioses with things like fungi and stuff.
Absolutely.
So they're directly connected into the Hika ley lines of Earth.
So
right.
What does it mean? So that's kind of, okay, so we've kind of talked about sort of how you got there and what attracted you to it. What does it mean today, though, to be practicing this? Is it how is it in practicing it in society and things like that? It being such an ancient religion. Yeah.
How much resistance or bottle capping do you get? Like, do they just put a label on you and say, well, you're a witch, and because there's a lot of different vocations within that broad terminology, and are they still resistant, or has it a type of situation where like the people are just interested because of what it is?
I will tell you, there are a few. Last year I was at an event at can't remember the name of the castle, but anyways, it's called Pagan Pride Day, and there are many of them that happen generally in the summertime, and all in different states, and it's open to the public, to the general public, and the whole premise is that people who are curious and who are not pagan but who want to know more about it can come in, and our jobs, while there are vendors there, the main idea is that we're presenting ourselves as a community to people who don't really know what to expect,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can see that, we're not terrible. And I had a woman come up to me and say, what does Pharmakeute mean? And I had explained it to her, and she said, but you look so nice. You can't be a witch. And I said, well, but I am. I said, it's not a bad thing. And I think that is still a popular misconception, that people just immediately, they hear the word witch and they think, that evil woman who made the poisoned apple and made Snow White, go to sleep. And that's not us.
How hard is it for you to change their opinion? Do you find that they resist it, or do you find once a situation like that occurs, they're more than willing to hear you out?
Well, this particular lady, I mean, she did hear me out. She listened to what I said, and when she walked away, she was still kind of nodding and smiling. So I think she left kind of mulling over what she learned.
A little bewildered.
Maybe.
Would you say that happens more often than not?
More often than not. I haven't actually run into anybody that was, wanting to burn me at the stake or throw rotten fruit or anything like that. So.
Okay.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. But you don't, I mean, these are some pretty weirdly charged times.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
Yeah, and I was just wondering, like, has that changed? I mean, because I used to be involved pretty heavily in all of that, but I'm not so much now, and that's why I was wondering, like, if you found any more or less acceptance in what you're doing, and people being interested in it and learning about it and understanding it and seeing the connections for what they truly are.
Well, and to kind of build on what he's asking there, Susan, I saw a documentary, I don't think it's more than 2 years old, that says that paganism is the fastest growing religion in the UK. Like there's a feeling in the UK of wanting to kind of get back to their sort of ancestral roots, for lack of a better word, and it seems to be growing rapidly.
I agree, and I think that even here in the States, it's starting to get more of a toehold because there's a freedom to be found as a pagan that you don't find in any of the desert religions.
Oh, you got to elaborate on that for us, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much that's taboo within all of the, within Judaism, within Christianity, and within Islam. There's just so much that's, forbidden, or haram in Arabic. It's not allowed. Men and women being together in the same room, for example. It's in Islam, that doesn't happen unless you're either married or, they're family members. But that's not a thing in paganism. Everybody gets to be with everybody. It's about community.
Yeah, it's very open.
Yeah, it's open. There aren't. I mean, I think for like everybody that would otherwise be like outcasts of society in general from any of the desert religions, they're welcomed in with open arms in paganism because we don't have those taboos. There's nothing that's forbidden because love is love.
Well, then it does kind of have some core tenets then, correct? I mean, it's not just something that throws its arms open wide to every conceivable type of individual, right? I mean, there is some definition there, right? Requiring certain things, love, generosity. What are those?
Well, I can't speak across the board for all pagans because obviously there are probably as many different traditions and they would have their own tenets, as there are in Christianity with Baptists and whatever else is out there. I don't.
Sure.
And let me point out as well that another big draw to the pagan religions is the afterlife. Like, most pagan religion afterlives deal with reincarnation or
right.
A much happier place that you're going to go to for eternity, whereas most European and post-apocalyptic sort of religions, where there's where these religions are dependent upon a Messiah to come back and establish some sort of an order, or for some sort of a battle to occur before something good can happen. I mean, these are all very depressing and constraining religions to be involved in, because ultimately, the best you can hope for is that the world's going to come to an end in some fashion. And, there's a lot of people that really want to opt out of a religion whose ultimate goal is something terrible.
Well, and a religion whose God allows terrible things to happen, because, it's, how can this God who is supposed to be, and that was another one of my issues when I was a child, because you'd see, terrible things happening to other children, and how can God let that happen to a child? How can God, who is full of love, allow that to happen? So I think that's, when you take that out of the equation, then
so that sounds like one of the
world makes more sense.
That's one of the significant philosophical issues, then, for lack of a better word, than that you've had with some of the Abrahamic religions.
Well, the question is still there, but in my tradition, we have a god and a goddess that we venerate. We don't worship them the way the Christian God is worshipped. They are more the reason that the seasons happen. So they're not in control of what we do. And so the things that happen to us as a result of either a karma that we've brought from a previous life, because as you mentioned, we do believe in reincarnation, rebirth. Mm-hmm. So there's life, death, and then rebirth. It's a cycle. So that if bad things are happening to you, then that's because there are lessons that need to be learned. And in the case of a child, it's not the child maybe that needed the lesson. It might be the parents. We're working towards enlightenment. And with each new rebirth, each time we relive our life, hopefully we're doing better the next time around.
You don't really view God then as like some kind of interesting taskmaster that you can send requests to alter the future. You kind of view the world as sort of a cycle that you're just currently participating in, and then at some point you're going to pass on and then be reborn and start that cycle over again. So it becomes more of a continuous thing, so that what is happening, unfortunate or otherwise, is just part of this present journey.
Yes, exactly. We say something in the morning. When I say we, I mean the initiates of the ash, birch, and willow. And it starts out, I am Pharmakeute, thorn-blooded witch of the old ways. And thorn-blooded means that when we are initiated, we prick our fingers with a thorn from a rose. Mm-hmm. And we exchange our lifeblood with plant blood. We drink the chlorophyll. And so there's an exchange there. So we begin by saying, I am a thorn-blooded witch of the old ways. And then I am descended from the stars, fated by the moon, given form by the land. I stand with my feet rooted in shadow, and I reach upward to the stars. So that's the cycle. We're from the stars, fated by the moon. If you listen to all of those, each one talks about how we came to be and what our spiritual journey is on Earth.
And each cycle is just a chance to refine and reach for spiritual enlightenment. And I would imagine, like in most cases, people could go through life just kind of maintaining the average buoyancy, and there's people that could truly hit some debauchery and really, really ruin themselves for quite a many number of lifetimes, perhaps. And then there are those who will reach beyond what average is and start looking for the connections between the cycles and reaching spirituality.
Wait a minute. Debauchery is a bad thing?
It is, in that sense of reincarnation. It's bad.
Shit, why didn't somebody tell me that sooner?
Yeah, you can go back. It's not good.
I was in the Navy, for fuck's sake, man. What am I going to do now?
Well, spiritual debauchery, not necessarily physical debauchery.
Oh, I might be all right then. Sorry, Susan, go ahead. I didn't mean to digress there.
No, that's fine.
You'll pay for that debauchery here in a few years, man.
But as I was saying, it's just the 5 points and we do this in front of a rose pentacle, and as a regular pentacle would have the 5 points. So each point represents one of the thorns in our tradition, and the thorns are the things that actually represent our challenges in the attainment of our goals, our spiritual growth. So when we're able to master, so to speak, each of the points on the 5 thorned path, then we are able to move forward. But that might take many lifetimes.
There's like outer ones, right? And then inner ones?
Exactly. If you see the rose pentacle, there are outer thorns and there are inner thorns.
Yeah.
And so the second part of that alignment is, I am the knower of plants, the seer of all that approaches, the hearer of the whispering dead. I am born of this world, but am not of this realm, and I wield the forces that move all tides and seasons. So these are also things that we hope to attain. The first one being the knower of plants, which goes back to being a Pharmakeute and knowing the plants not only on a physical level, but on a spiritual level.
And that starts showing you the path to hit the other points, so to speak.
Exactly.
It's very cool. I think I have a graphic of it here that I've looked up on the internet.
And that's
why I was asking.
This is an ancient tradition, Susan. This
isn't not it's based in knowledge that Raven Grimassi and his wife Stephanie Grimassi have been given through their connection to spirit, and based on what Raven's, because he's a huge scholar of ancient religions, while it doesn't claim to be a living tradition, it's not something that you can say, oh, my 8th great grandmother used to be a Pharmakeute and she was in the ash, birch, and willow. That's not what we're professing. But it is more of a living tradition in that we're practicing ways that we know that our ancestors connected to nature and to spirit. And hopefully, to the people that it speaks to, this is what will help us to attain our spiritual enlightenment.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm going to go out on a limb with my limited knowledge, and this is like a improved version of, say, the Gardnerian branch of Wicca or the Buckner branch of Wicca, right? Like, it's my understanding that Gardner was the first person in and around 1945 who started codifying different pagan rituals and putting them into some sort of an order that you could call Wicca and use, even though they were dispersed in their where he drew these things from. They were all ancient rituals that lent themselves to particularities, right?
That's true.
And then this takes it a step further, though, right? Like,
well, I just want to clarify.
Sure.
We are not Wicca. There are precepts that go along with being a Wiccan that we do not prescribe to.
Oh, can you elaborate on some of that?
Well, for example, one that a lot of Wiccans will tell you is the threefold law. So whatever you do will come back to you 3 times, whether it's good or bad. We don't believe that.
Okay.
And I don't want to bash Wiccans because
no.
They believe what they believe, and that's.
And you're not. We ask you to explain to us, so you're not bashing anybody. We ask you to educate us. No.
I don't want backlash,
No.
but that's just not where we are coming from.
Okay.
For us, our rule is you don't poke at the beast, because what we believe is that you just don't harm the innocent. But once somebody has harmed you or attempted to harm you, then they've lost the protection of being innocent.
So this is like a whole new thing, right? This is not a branch of something. This is like a whole new thing, right?
Well, I don't know if "new" is the right word,
Yeah.
though. If I'm understanding you right, Susan, I mean, it new is not it's not new per se.
Well, I mean, a new organization.
It's like a revival almost.
A new organization. Not. In other words, one
Okay.
that's not derived from previous organizations. It's a new.
You're both right.
Okay.
You're both right.
All right,
It's
that
not,
never happens.
I know, right?
It's definitely new in that it's coming, Raven and Stephanie Grimassi are the sacerdote and the keeper of the sacred for this, and they have created it.
Okay, that's
So it's new in that sense, but it's also very rooted in what we know that our ancestors did in practices that we know that they took part in.
right.
So is it an evolving doctrine in the sense that as new information becomes available, it will be
Absolutely.
incorporated? Oh, okay. Yeah, so revivalistically new. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would consider
Yes,
it
and to me, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for other initiates. I don't know all of them, but I think the few that I know personally that are local, I think they would all agree that it is a revival of sorts, of something that really speaks to all of us on a really deep soul level.
when the first efforts of organizing these things together, it was kind of done under the pretense of making a religion to some extent, right? To putting it inside people's cosmology as a religion. But this was kind of taken as that, as well as like the ancient knowledge that's lasted from those times to this time, that's still practical, spiritual as well as physical. So it's built upon a foundation that was a bit more understood before it was begun. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, and I would agree with that.
More intentional in its construct, more useful,
Yes.
therefore, in the end.
Yes.
So,
One of the things that Raven always says is that we're ever ancient, ever new. Ever ancient meaning because we are, built upon these traditions and the knowledge that we have, but ever new because there's always something new that is being revealed. He's always getting new information.
yeah. And when a lot of times, weirdly enough today, it comes from science sometimes even. Not even in terms of like medicine or plants or anything, but in terms of spirituality, sometimes science can start touching upon that subject.
Well, that's what's interesting is that a lot of the things that we've believed for however long that they've had this material and they've known these things, suddenly science is backing it up. And it's like, well, yeah, we've known that already. We know that trees communicate with each other.
Yeah.
We've been saying that for years. So it's really interesting how science does start to catch up.
We did a whole podcast on my little hobby of Orc OR, which in my mind is one of those seminal pieces of scientific theory that connect the metaphysical world with the physical world and weaves in things like reincarnation and stuff like that. It's pretty cool, man.
It's an interesting subject, no doubt. So, Susan, let me ask you a question then. Okay, so there must be two pieces to this in application, right, in your practice. And I of course, I did the digging and I saw the Etsy stuff and things like that. But so there's obviously a metaphysical practice, and then there's a practical practice too, correct? To how you sort of practice your religion here.
Well, there is, and as far as the Etsy shop goes. There are things that are clearly more of a metaphysical bend and things that are much more mundane. But through all of that, there's the thread of what I'm bringing into it. And so, for example, even a simple herbal blend that I might put together for someone who needs help sleeping, I'm working my own magic into that because I have this intimate relationship with the plants that I'm using.
Yeah.
And so as I'm putting the blend together, I call upon those spirits, the plant spirits, to work with me and to provide the healing that this person needs. And I think that's how I blend, my spiritual practice with the mundane sort of practical.
So this everything that you make and sell is made with a specific intention, and they're all made by hand. You're not mass producing any of this stuff with machinery or anything like that, right?
No, I'm doing it all myself.
Like literally, like the old cliche image of the witch in the kitchen.
I literally have a mortar and pestle, and I do it.
And doing it with all intention.
Absolutely.
Can you kind of give us some stories about that process of actually going through? Like you said, you have a mortar and pestle, and I mean, what's it require to kind of do some of this stuff?
Like I imagine most of your house is given over to that process since it's diverse, right? Like you do a lot of different things. I see.
I do. So what I'll have to do, like if I'm doing something, like if I'm knitting something for someone, say, then I'll light a candle and sort of, I have a sage spray and I spray the area around myself and sort of cleanse that. And then I have created this space for myself to do the work. That's so awesome. that I'm working with only the intention. So if I'm making a hat for someone, then my intention is that this hat keeps them warm. And as I'm knitting each stitch, I'm working in, prayers and wishes for them to be warm and cozy. Mm-hmm. It's just...
That's about as pure as it gets, man. I mean, under any circumstances, that's about as pure as it gets when the person manufacturing has that sort of an intimate knowledge of what's going on, an intimate knowledge of the devices and material that they're using, the ability to cleanse the material before creating the product and then making the product to order. That's good. Well, I don't think it gets any better than that.
It's kind of like, everybody has that thing that was either made by their mom or their grandmother or a blanket or something like that. And the idea there is that it was made for you with love. So you have some sort of connection to it, right? Like an emotional connection. So what you're providing is sort of a way for people to still be able to buy or get things that are made with that kind of intention.
But really, even beyond that, most of the connection that people have with heirlooms are the energy that they give that heirloom themselves. It's difficult to say what the environment was when that thing was created or brought. I mean, this is something that
this is even above and beyond that.
Like from component parts, man. This is tailored from component parts all the way to creation and manufacturing, and just absolutely ripe for being attuned to whoever's going to use it for whatever they're going to use it for. I mean, I don't see how it could actually be any better. I don't know how you would do it. I mean, really don't.
It definitely has a limiting factor, though, doesn't it, Susan? Because you're one person. You can only do so much at a time.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Well, especially so when it comes to knitting time, I try to tell people if they want something for the holidays to start thinking about it in the summer, because I do start to get really, really rushed, and I really don't like to work under that kind of pressure because of what that puts into what I'm making.
Yep. Right. It would be coming from the wrong place for you with that whole, doing things from intention. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. Exactly. And thankfully the clients that I've had have all understood that, so that when I haven't met the deadlines, they know why.
Yeah.
And they're really understanding. If somebody came to me at the last week before Christmas and said, I really want this, and I understand that I'm not going to get it for Christmas, but please, I want you to make this. And that's fine.
So I'm going through your store here. I hope you don't mind. But I'm seeing all kinds of stuff here. Like, okay, obviously it looks like a lot of herbal teas and things like that you're doing specific blends of teas, but I'm seeing things like witch's salt. And there was another one down here, hawthorn elixir and things like this. Can you kind of elaborate on some of this? Like what your products are diverse, but they certainly seem to have some sort of, every one of them seems to have an intention. So can you kind of walk us through some of your store here?
Well, in the case of the witch's salt, that's generally been something that people use for protection. And I started making that because I used to have a brick and mortar store, and I would have people come in and say, well, what can I do to protect myself from, this person's, it feels like they're attacking me psychically, or sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, but people need something to help them. And black salt specifically, that one is put together with herbs that are known to have correspondences of protection. I blacken those myself in a cast iron pan until they smoke and turn black, and then you add the salt. And that's made to protect people. So they'll put it in their windowsill or across the threshold of their doors, and that's to keep out anything that would harm them. And then you mentioned the hawthorn. That's practical as well as spiritual, because hawthorn it's a pretty magical plant in that physically it can, rather than like either some people have high blood pressure and they need to take something to lower it, or they have low blood pressure and they need something to raise it. Hawthorn can do both. It's a regulator. So that in and of itself to me is just really magical. So on a spiritual level, the hawthorn also works with the heart energy. So for someone who has been through a lot of heartache, or just had a lot of things that are weighing heavily on them, hawthorn can be really helpful in helping them to process that so that they can move on to something happier. Something as simple as the dandelion. It's, people call it a weed, but it's useful, and it is magical.
Well, it also appears that a lot of the products and stuff that you sell have absolutely straight up practical purposes too. And so tattoo salve makes sense. Okay, organic aloe and goat milk bath, that seems pretty straightforward. That's if you got dry skin or whatever. But the one I really got to know about is this organic natural nipple butter. What are we doing with that?
Well, if you're a breastfeeding mom and your nipples are cracked, you want something to help.
Oh, see now
make that feel better.
See, that's why I'm going to hell. That's it right there. I didn't even give it that's a completely natural, beautiful, and here I am, with the debauchery again.
Guy.
There's that debauchery.
Titles and not reading descriptions.
Yeah, maybe that too.
Who's got time for descriptions?
But I can give you another example of how I create things. I had a friend whose son was having a really tough time in school, and his teachers kept calling his mom and telling her that he was being a real distraction in the classroom. And finally, she went to her parent-teacher conference, and everyone she talked to said that they recommended she get him tested and evaluated for ADD or ADHD meds.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted him to be medicated. And she called me up crying and said, I don't want to put him on medication. You have to help me. What can you do? And I mean, I knew intellectually right off the bat what herbs I would choose. But I wanted to work on a spiritual level as well. So I went into, at the time I had a pantry that I could just walk into. Mm-hmm. And it was lined with, all my herbs in jars. And I just went into the middle of it and I said, okay, so intellectually I know what I would do, but what should I use? And I just kind of let spirit guide my hand, and I put together a blend and gave it to her. And she gave it to him twice a day. And within a week, she called me up and she said, I have been hearing nothing but glowing reports from his teachers. He has changed dramatically. And she was just so grateful. And I feel like it's not just because, it's not just from the herbs. It's because of, again, my connection to those herbs mm-hmm. and what I put into the blend as it's being made.
Yeah. What is the thing that you've done with this knowledge that you are most proud of, or that you consider to be your biggest success, whether that's somebody you helped or the business that you've done because you're helping so many people, or a personal thing? Once you've went on this journey, what has happened that you're just the most proud of, or that you feel like you've done the most successfully and happy with?
I feel the most proud of the fact that I am able to help people. I mean, I had a client that had tried desperately for years to get pregnant and had done the shots and everything. And I made a blend for her, and she wrote to me a few months later and said, well, now I need some of your anti-nausea tea because I'm pregnant. And that was just, I couldn't have been, I cried tears of joy. That was just such an amazing thing. I didn't have any real doubts. When I make something, I have complete confidence in what I'm making, but it's still a wonderful thing to hear from people, that you've helped them.
Because it lets you frame it too, like even to be able to articulate and answer a question like that, like to personify it for you, because like you said, you've got confidence and you know what you're doing, but to have feedback just means a lot. Gives you energy. Yeah.
Getting the confirmation is amazing.
Yeah. Provides energy for you to just keep doing more of what you're doing. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
How would that process, okay, so you said that you knew what herbs you were going to use, and it sounds like that you used some sort of divine inspiration to add to that, correct? Sort of how you went through that process.
Pick them out.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't go in. I mean, I knew what herbs would make sense.
Okay.
But I hadn't picked them out. I just went into the cupboard, right, and I just kind of stood there and started taking herbs off the shelf. And when I looked at them, of course, some of them were herbs that I had already kind of in my head said, well, this makes sense. But there were some in there that I said, oh, that's a surprise.
And literally, I think what would be is that you're letting the resonating of the energy between you and that herb be the thing that fine-tunes between the selection of herbs, because you're being dependent upon the relationship that you have with these herbs and stuff to fine-tune exactly which one is going to help for the intention, because you intellectually and spiritually understand the intention because that was conveyed to you through the person that did, and essentially you're conveying that to these herbs and stuff, and you're feeling that out and figuring out which one of these are responding in resonance in terms of energy to be the ones that call out more than the others, right?
Yes, that's exactly it.
And now when this is applied by the for lack of a better term, I'll call it the end user, because that's the engineering speak, right? But whatever. So when the person that this is going to, is there a process of intention when they consume it, imbibe it, or whatever they're going through? Is there a ceremonial aspect or anything to it on that end for the recipient as well? In
the case of the person who got pregnant, she lives across the country. I have no idea what she did. I gave her instructions for using it, but they were just basic instructions for how to brew the tea and how often she should take it.
Well, it was bought with intent.
What she did, I don't know.
It was definitely purchased from you with that intention, however. I mean, nonetheless.
That would probably depend upon how much training they had in implementing their intent into the physical world. You know what I mean?
Right. I don't know, because a lot of my clients, not all of my clients, are pagan.
Yeah, so they might not be equipped to use it in that manner, but they wouldn't have to. It would help, but it probably wouldn't have to because of everything that you do.
No, I'm just trying to understand the process of how this goes through. Yeah. Because some of the stuff, obviously, I doubt, when you're selling tattoo salve that there's it's kind of like, it just kind of works, right? You've put it together with certain types of, I don't know, oils or however that's specifically blended for that sort of function.
Yeah. Yes.
So even though it's done with intention, I'm hearing of healing and things like that. It's pretty, okay, here, just put this on. It's like a Band-Aid. You got a boo-boo here, use this kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, it's the same with, say, the comfrey salve. You have a cut or a bruise or whatever, you rub it on there. But the idea is that it doesn't matter what the user, how they use it, if they're putting it on there, because I've made it to do this particular thing, and so that's what it's going to do.
Yeah, we should probably say this, because I don't think we have yet, that this is your store's called Branwen's Dreams, and that's BRANWENS Dreams, okay, on Etsy. So I guess that's kind of how they find you in your store, correct?
Yep, it's Branwen's Dreams on Etsy.
And what's that? Where does that name come from?
Branwen's sort of been my alter ego. When I moved to Kuwait and we first got the internet, I connected to some people on IRC. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. What do you mean connected to the internet? For the young people out there used to be a gray, dark time where we didn't have the World Wide Web.
You just had to connect
It was
to it.
chaos. It was like the Dark Ages. It was terrible.
So it took us a little while to get the internet over there because when I landed in Kuwait, the oil fires were still burning and the infrastructure was pretty much decimated from the war.
Right.
And
So we're talking back in the early 90s kind of thing, yeah?
Yeah. Yep. It was late 91 because my firstborn I was pregnant and she was born in February of 92. So when I got there, like I said, the oil fires were burning and obviously we didn't have internet yet. So when I got the internet, I needed to create a name. And my husband didn't want me using my real name. My ex-husband now didn't want me using my real name. So I started going back to the books that I used to read as a child. I brought a bunch of them over with me. And Branwen was a person that I greatly admired. It was a character from a book that I greatly admired. And I liked the meaning of the name.
What's it mean?
White. Win is white. So hair. Well, it's white haired anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And so my online persona was sort of a contradiction because I was Branwen Raven Hair. It was so long ago. Yeah. And that name, Branwen, just stuck with me. I was Branwen through everything. And that became my email. And
yep. Yeah.
That's when I was opening my Etsy shop, it just made sense.
I've had a similar experience when in 1992 I started working for a psychic line, and we all had to have a name because we weren't allowed to use our real names. And so I ended up with a name, and it became a internet persona for a long time, and all this, that, and was my psychic name for a very long time. And then I eventually named my son that. It's one of his four names. Wow. But yeah, I can totally see how, at some point, something that comes to you at a point in your life when everything else comes to you, and how it's almost impossible to not identify yourself with that.
Yeah, it's absolutely just another part of me.
Yeah.
So this came to you while you were practicing Islam.
Well, I hadn't actually started practicing at that point.
Okay, so it was sort of still there in the background then this whole time.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting.
I've always been, I played D&D as a kid, so I've always been sort of interested in magic and
Eric's
otherwise.
Eric's not being rude. He's chuckling because. Go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
No.
We don't want her thinking you're being rude, but it's
no.
common thread thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's. Yeah, go ahead. I'll tell you.
It was just, the books that I read, I wasn't the typical teenage girl reading love stories. I was reading Dragonlance and I wanted to be these people. Mm-hmm. And so just the fact that to find out that there actually is the possibility of doing things that aren't mainstream, that aren't mundane. You can work in a way that is magic.
Yes.
To me, it's like, okay, it's a book come true for me.
I mean, that's the reason why I'm laughing is because that's exactly how I got my name. It was a D&D character's name that I made up. And once I started doing this as a profession, and I adopted that name for that purpose because I had made it up and stuff. And I thought, well, there you go. And that's I just find that to be comfortingly humorous. Because that's exactly how I arrived at mine.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was because I used to play online, D&D online, and then Neverwinter Nights. Mm-hmm. And that was my Branwen Ravenhair was my login on Neverwinter Nights, and I had a character named Branwen as well. So, I mean, just Branwen's been following me around for a while.
Yep.
All right, so now that we've gone down that rabbit hole, we have a lot of people that end up on this show, by the way, or have had a lot of people on this show that are directly connected to either authoring that or that game or in that genre or in that kind of.
It's a common thread between, I don't know if how a broader term than artist would be, maybe free thinker. Like most free thinkers tend to be involved with the aspect of role playing because, I mean, not to harp or anything, but because, like I wrote in my historical thesis, it's a metaphysical bridge that serves the same purpose that religion does to a more organized universe. So,
well, that was going to kind of lead me to this question too, Susan, kind of where he's getting at, because I was going to bring that up this time, but you beat me to it. And that is that one of the things that Eric talked about in his, or I don't know, proposed in his thesis was that during this satanic panic period, the churches felt that this game was a challenge kind of to them. And Eric sort of proposed that was actually kind of true because it was a challenge to the political right, but it wasn't a challenge to the church. The church wanted to legitimize the evils of Dungeons and Dragons so that it could legitimize its usefulness in society. You know, they use it to prove the evil existed. There's the bad, so
we're the good.
We're the good,
yeah.
Right, yeah. So
essentially, in a nutshell.
and kind of though through that it fulfilled a lot of things in individuals that church used to.
Yes.
Or also did.
Right.
So and so it's kind of interesting to find that you had trouble, it sounds like, accepting any of the Abrahamic religions on face because you found them not fulfilling. And I wonder now that knowing, that you played these games and read these books and stuff like that, how much that contributed to that need to go deeper and understand things more.
Hugely. It did hugely because it showed.
It probably did, but I will tell you, it was there prior to that because I wasn't reading those books when I was 7 or 8. So when I was, baptized by Jimmy Swaggart, when I was saved, that was at a much younger age than before I had started reading any of those books.
Yeah, and the same here too. Like it was, not to be bad, but for me, Christianity, it was blatantly obvious pretty early on, about 8, 9 years old, that I didn't understand it. My assumption was until around the age of 12 was that maybe I just didn't understand it. Maybe the questions I had about it were the wrong questions, and oftentimes that's what I was told, that those weren't the questions that I should be asking. So it took me between whatever age of 9 to 12 to really get over the self-doubt or to see enough stark craziness that I was like, well,
absolutely.
There's just nothing, and yet it can't be me.
There was a time, absolutely. There was a time when I was questioning me and, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, right.
What am I lacking something fundamental in my, in my being that I'm not worthy?
These guys all seem happy, and then you figure out at some point, oh no, just in church.
No, they're not really.
Yeah, they're just happy in church, apparently. I see.
Right.
They're not really happy.
So this is a matter of that goes back to being a matter of resonance. But so you were not resonating at would you say the Jimmy Swaggart thing? Okay, that something wasn't resonating. So then pursuing fantasy novels and Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games and things like that did you find that satisfied that need of exploration that you weren't getting?
Are you asking her? Or?
I'm asking Susan,
okay.
the guest that we asked on the show.
Okay, I'm just making sure, man, because you're looking at me, so.
Sorry.
And it sounds like a question someone would ask me, as I wasn't sure.
I wouldn't say that it satisfied it as much as, but it started to fill in, and it provided a getaway from everything else that was going on around me. It was an escape. But it also sort of showed me potentials.
What has been the most difficult thing for you to overcome, like since you've been on this path, in terms of just to master it? What's been the most difficult thing?
I can't think of anything that's been really difficult. There really isn't anything that I found to be difficult other than having to talk to people who, like my mom before she passed,
Mm-hmm.
trying to talk to other people who are not pagan,
Understood. Yeah.
and getting them to understand where I'm coming from.
What would you want people, the casual listener, to kind of know about you and your religion? I mean, if you could say something to everybody, what would that kind of be? And I know it's a big statement, so.
Well, I don't know. We don't burn and cook babies. We don't eat them. I guess I don't.
So they're missing. Don't believe the hype kind of thing.
Yeah, don't believe the hype. I think it's really sad how society has been perpetuating it forever. I mean, think about how ugly the witch is in Snow White. I mean, witches, they're always presented as these horrible looking, really evil beings, and that's not us. But it's hard to get rid of that connotation.
Well, it's kind of against your entire ethos, though, to pursue anything that would be dark or destructive in nature, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess I don't.
In a sense, dark or destructive. I mean, dark. See, dark. I think you mean like evil.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Because dark isn't a bad thing.
It's just the opposite of light, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you can't have one without the other. So, dark's not a bad thing. And people talk about, their shadow side and how they have to be careful when they're dealing with their shadow side. But shadow isn't a bad thing either. It's what makes us up. If we're constantly pushing away that shadow side, then you're not really being true to you. Because it exists and all you're doing is tamping it down and trying to hide it, but it's there. You have to address it.
Kind of sounds very ideologically similar to Taoism, right? Which always honors that there's the yin and the balance, and I almost said yin and yang. Is that right? Is that Taoism? Is yin and yang? Yang.
Well,
okay.
The yin and yang.
Okay.
I think so, and I think maybe that's why. I don't want to speak for Jeff, but I think that's why he has such an easy time with it as well, because I think he thinks of Taoism as sort of the Chinese magic. Right.
And just so we're clear, when we talk about Jeff, we're talking about the Occidental Taoist who's been on our show several times, but that's your husband.
Yes.
So get a shout out to Jeff there. But yeah, it just seems like the more because to me, all religions are fascinating, and I can't wait to have more people that can come on here and explain their different religions and ethoses and things like that to me. But I find that there seems to be a common thread that speaks to this concept of becoming a better or higher self, or living to a higher moral authority of yourself, of the self, and things like that. And to me, that's sort of what they're all getting at. And if they're not getting at that, then they probably want to run from them, right? I mean, that's when things really start to get kind of crazy and cultish and weird. But it seems to me that anything that sort of has that common thread pursuant to a better society, or better individual, better in the sense of more caring, more loving, all of these kind of things. To me, that just all seems like they're saying the same thing. They're just kind of saying it from a different angle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
For people who maybe have not had any direct experience with this type of healing, and concerning the holistic properties of these medicines and stuff, people will do a lot. They'll believe in doctors. They'll believe in second opinions. They'll believe in the emissaries of whatever religion that they subscribe to. They need to believe in themselves, and they need to also consider things like this type of holistic healing, because they put so much faith in external things. I think that if they would put a little bit of faith in themselves and in this type of a situation, that they would benefit from a lot. And I think that people who haven't made this attempt to do this or to live in this way should give it a try.
I agree wholeheartely.
When we find that your profession here now in practice has done very well for you. I mean, you are you're frazzled all the time, right? So you're out straight. So people are definitely finding a value in what you're providing.
I agree. I think they are, and I'm very blessed in that respect, because I'm able to do what brings me spiritual fulfillment and be a productive member of society at the same time.
So, Susan, is there anything else we haven't covered here with you tonight?
No, I think I've said what I needed to say. Unless you have some other questions.
No, I think we're good. And wow, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time again on such short notice. And anything coming up in the future or anything like that you want to come back on and talk with us about, please let us know. We love to, have people back. Beyond that, I think that's it for us tonight. We appreciate everybody listening, and we'll catch you all next time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thanks.